Well, it's good to be here with you again. When Lauren asked me to take a slot in August, I suggested 2 dates, and then he suggested that maybe I could take 2 of them. And so I was on here earlier in August, and this is then the last day of August. And I'm getting a little bit worried because he lets me talk on all kinds of different subjects as if I'm an expert on all these subjects. And by now you understand that that is not the case. But I do my best, and that is what I will do also this evening here in the Netherlands. What is it? Early afternoon where you are? And let me try to get the video, the PowerPoint on the screen.
Perfect.
Well, it went away on my screen. So I'll need to.
We can see it here.
Yeah, but I can't see it. Something went wrong. Yes. Okay. I think I'm ready to go. You hear me?
Yes, and we can see the PowerPoint.
You see the screen. Okay, so then we are ready to go. Reputation. Our reputation, God's reputation, and the reputation of the church. Those are the things that we are going to talk about during this presentation. And I hope it will provide a good basis for the discussion that we are going to have. Now, I need to go to, I want to get the next slide. Here it is. Let me start with trying to define the term reputation. When you look at dictionaries, etc., you find these definitions. Reputation, the beliefs or opinions that are generally held about someone or something. A widespread belief that someone or something has a particular characteristic. And then a favorable and publicly recognized name or standing for merit, achievement, reliability. But it must be recognized that the word can have not only a positive, but also a negative meaning. A good name or a bad name, a good reputation or a bad reputation. We're going to talk about the reputation of persons, reputation of countries, ethnicities, people groups. Businesses have a certain reputation. And then the more important aspect of our talk, reputation of Christianity and of the section of Christianity that we call Seventh-day Adventism. But in the end, it's all about the reputation of God. So that is more or less the order also in which we're going to talk about reputation. Now, we all know that well-known people have a certain reputation. When I worked in the division office in Great Britain, there was Margaret Thatcher, the Iron Lady. And I had many discussions with the treasurer of the division. I was the secretary at the time. We traveled a lot together, and we talked about Margaret Thatcher. He was a great admirer of the Iron Lady, because she tackled the labor unions, and really he believed that the prosperity for parts, at least of the UK, was due to her hard work, her insights. I just didn't like Margaret Thatcher. I didn't like that kind of politics and so, but she had a reputation of being determined, and that earned her the title Iron Lady. Now, President Clinton, to name another example, he had a certain reputation, at least on this side of the pond. He was known as dodging the draft, and of course he smoked, but he did not inhale. That kind of settled his reputation for many people, at least in this part of the world. Looking at another president, President Bush Jr., I read his autobiography, and in his introduction, he says many people will wonder about his autobiography because many would think that I'm not even able to write. He had a reputation of not being the smartest person in the world. Well, whether a reputation is true or not, a person is settled with that kind of reputation. And to become president of the United States, you must at least have some qualities that bring you there. Like Donald Trump, he has a reputation of, I think, in the minds of many, of being a liar. He himself thinks that he is a stable genius. He may not have said that lately, but at least he wants to have a reputation that he is not weird. Well, we can go on. People have certain reputation. Take Queen Elizabeth. She had a reputation of being totally dedicated to her duty, which made her work until her late 90s. Countries have reputations. In some cases, it's based on history. They have a sense of superiority that they want to convey. That is the reputation that they envy. History has determined that they are a great nation. That is something that, and you see the flags there of the United Kingdom. We living in continental Europe, we do not think that Britain has the same greatness as it had in the past, but the Brits have not really come to that conclusion. The reputation of some countries is based on their colonizing history, on wars, on cruelty, on good things, etc. We characterize peoples, nations, nationalities. The Germans are, and we have certain words to use. The French, the Americans are, etc. They are being characterized by some words that identify who they are, mainly what their reputation is. And you've heard said that in heaven the cooks are French. They have a reputation for being good cooks and eating. The policemen in heaven are English. The mechanics are German. The lovers are Italian, and the bankers are Swiss. That is the reputation of these various nationalities. But then in hell, the cooks are English, the policemen are German, the mechanics are French, the lovers are Swiss, and the bankers are Italian. But to talk about reputation, just something in passing about the reputation of businesses. Until not that long ago, it was very difficult to have beer without alcohol. Now it's a big thing all over the world, and you are no longer looked again as a strange person when you order 0.0 beer. But in 1989, Heineken, and you may have heard that word, Heineken came on the market with a new product, a 0% beer. buckler, it was called. And there was a comedian on television, and he just poked so much fun at that new product. And, about the kind of people that would consume it, that would drink it, that actually, because of that, the reputation of that new product went down so quickly that it was actually taken off the market. And it lasted another 15 or 20 years before Heineken came back with a 0% beer. Mineral water, Perrier, famous make, they had two big disasters that ruined their reputation. 1990, there was some impurity found in their water in some places in the world, and they decided to save their reputation that they would recall all the bottles of mineral water from the market. And that 150 million bottles were recalled. It almost meant that they went under. They had a similar but smaller scale disaster just earlier this year, where they had to recall almost 3 million bottles. But their goal was, whatever it takes, they must maintain their reputation of purity. Reputation is important, is essential when you are in business. It's a biblical principle. Reputation, a good reputation, a good name. A good name is to be chosen rather than great riches, and flavor is better than silver and gold. Of course, being human, we like to have both a good name and also the great riches, but for Solomon, he says a good name is to be chosen rather. A good reputation goes above riches, and favor, a good name is better than silver and gold. And that is repeated also in a statement in Ecclesiastes. So reputation has much to do with names. We give children a name that we just fancy. And there are fashions in name giving. There are certain names that are popular, and there are certain names that disappear. Often in the past, we named our children after our parents or our grandparents, and parents and grandparents would be greatly frustrated if a grandchild would not bear their name. In the Bible, things were different in Bible times. Names had a different kind of significance, often expressing the hope, the expectations that the name that the child would be. Names in the Bible, in many cases, define persons, what they are or what they are expected to be. Names also have power, and in many ways, name and reputation are parallel concepts. David Maas, in his book, What's in a Name Anyway, says perhaps the most important scriptural significance of names is not so much in the label as it is in the reputation, whether of fame or infamy of the holder of the label. So name, reputation is something of extreme importance in the Bible, in Bible times. And we see, and you all are aware of that sometimes we have change of names when the person who bears a name no longer represents the meaning of that name. We see Jacob becomes Israel. Abraham becomes Abraham. Hosea, and that is not a prophet, but the person who was Joshua, the one who was involved with the settlement of Israel in the Promised Land. Hosea became Joshua. Simon, he became Peter, the rock. And we know just a few more examples: Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. Their names had all the the God of Israel in their name, but when they were at the Babylonian court, their names were changed in Belteshazzar, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, which were names involving the name of the Babylonian deities. So people could have a certain name, but they could eventually have another name if their name no longer covered what kind of person they were to start with. In that sense, we can understand that when we change, when we become new people, other people, when Christians grow in their faith, there is the promise of God that we also will have a new name, a new reputation. In the letter to Pergamum, one of the 7 letters in the beginning of the book of Revelation, there Christ says, I will give that person a white stone with a new name written on it. That person will be renewed, a new name. Same in the letter to the church in Philadelphia. I will write on them the name of my God and the name of the city of my God. And in Isaiah 56, God speaks to the eunuchs. He speaks to people on the margin of society. I will give them in my temple a memorial and a name better than sons and daughters. I will give them an everlasting name. So there is all the time that concept that name is important. Name defines the person. And when the person becomes a different kind of person, when the person is converted, when the person dedicates himself to the Lord, he will get a new name. God promises also in Isaiah 65 that his servants will receive a new name. So with that as background, let's see what the reputation is of the church, the Adventist Church, God's reputation. When we look at church leavers, and there are many studies done why people leave the church. And I'm talking here not just about the Seventh-day Adventist Church, but about Christianity in general, church in general. Then, yes, people sometimes leave because they no longer accept the theology of Christianity. They're not longer convinced that Christianity is true. But most people who leave the church, they have problems with the reputation of Christianity. They leave the church because of hypocrisy. That is, unfortunately, the reputation that Christianity has. So there are, in my country, there are some expressions that tell you how people are suspicious of Christians, of Christianity. And they say that you must always be careful when you give a Christian a hand, because you might not get it back. And there are different sayings that express that Christians are known for their hypocrisy. Christianity, others say, is simply irrelevant to where we are in today's life. There is always in the church, in Christianity, a focus on money. That is one of the reputations of Christianity. The church always wants more. And the church is known, they say, for its power play, for its politics, and for its bureaucracy. Well, whether we agree or not, that is the reputation that Christianity has in the minds of many. When we look at evangelical Christianity, we see that many look at evangelical Christianity as being presented by the health and wealth gospel. And that has kind of ruined the reputation of evangelical Christianity for them. Others really don't feel that this once saved, always saved is something that they want to adhere to, and connect that with the reputation of evangelical Christianity. And of course, the reputation of evangelical Christianity has been really damaged by some of the television ministries. It may be less today than it has been a couple of decades ago, but we remember persons like Jim Becker, etc., where money always played an important role. And then the reputation of evangelical Christianity has, of course, lately been very much damaged by its political associations. And I don't think I need to comment in any way on the picture that you see there, the political association of present-day evangelical Christianity that has really hurt in the minds, in the eyes of many, the reputation of evangelicals. When we talk about Roman Catholics, and you know that we as Seventh-day Adventists, we don't think highly. Well, I should rephrase that. Many, I shouldn't say we, but many in our church do not think highly of Roman Catholicism. We know about the history, and people say, not only Adventists, but also other Protestants, but Adventists in particular, they look at the history of Catholicism, and there's very little good that they can say about that. They talk about the persecution, the Inquisition, and then, of course, the discrimination of women through the ages and until today, the enforced celibacy, also the power plays and the politics of Roman Catholicism, the money scandals and the sex scandals. All these things have really hurt the reputation of Roman Catholicism. And I have much appreciated, actually, the piece that Lauren just recently wrote about anti-Roman Catholicism in Adventism, and wholeheartedly agree with him that we must stop this anti-Catholicism that has been such an important or prominent characteristic of Adventism. But somewhat closer to home, damaging God's reputation in Adventism. There are a number of things, I think, that have really damaged the reputation of Adventism in the minds of many, but also God's reputation as represented by Seventh-day Adventist. The ongoing fundamentalism. Now, of course, many would claim that our church is not fundamentalist. And officially, no, we are not. But in reality, fundamentalism has been very prominent in Seventh-day Adventism, and today also determines a lot of what we say and do. And I believe that fundamentalism really hurts God's reputation, and that somehow we should get rid of it. And that is also true of legalism, which often is linked with fundamentalism. We say that we are no legalists, but certainly, and one more down the list, the last generation theology is very much linked also with legalism and the idea that we can become perfect. These things have hurt God's reputation. And in the eyes of many other Christians, it has hurt the reputation of the Seventh-day Adventist Church. Anti-Trinitarianism. It's been through the 2 centuries now that we exist, a problem, our stand with regards to the doctrine of the Trinity. when time passed, it seemed that we finally had lost the old anti-Trinitarianism of our pioneers, but unfortunately, today there is a lot of anti-Trinitarianism again in the Seventh-day Adventist Church. Placing Ellen G. White on a pedestal and making her the final word on almost everything, that has really hurt the reputation of Adventism in the eyes of many, and God's reputation as well. And in that connection, I can also mention the cult around the book, The Great Controversy, that many Christians around us have a hard time understanding why that book is still so important to us, why we would want to distribute hundreds of millions of copies of that book. And then this ever-present still enemy thinking. It is us and they. Sure, there was a time when we were treated as enemies by other religious movements, and maybe there was some reason why we could see other denominations, for instance, as our enemies, because there was a kind of hostility back and forth. But today, in this age of secularism, other Christians are not our enemies, but they are our allies in bringing the gospel to a world that is more and more opposed to Christian values. So this enemy thinking, I think, is something that really damages our reputation as an Adventist church, and it damages the kind of presentation that we give of the God that we say that we serve. The church has, I believe, a number of major problems when it comes to the reputation of the Adventist church. And that is just looking at from a slightly different point of view. And maybe here are some issues that we would want to talk about a little further. The hostility that we have towards other Christians. I think that's a real problem for the reputation of our church. The standpoint regarding the equality of women. People inside and outside of our church, many of them, really do not understand. And a large percentage of Adventists in the Western world certainly do not understand why we cannot come to the point that we enforce, that we have practiced full equality of women. And that is also true for people who belong to the LGBTQ plus or whatever alphabet series of alphabet letters that you use. When you ask many of our younger people, but also many of people of the older generations, they believe that it's urgent that we review our position because it really hurts our reputation. I was involved a number of years ago in a debate in the Netherlands about LGBTQ. Somebody was accused, a person with some standing in society who is a Seventh-day Adventist, was accused of being a foe, an homophobe. Yeah, that's the word. And so this was put into a magazine, and it was a very prominent article in that magazine. And I took that magazine. I was the union president at that time. I took that magazine to the tribunal for journalists in the Netherlands. And I said, this is something that we cannot accept, that we are pictured as a homo-hating church. And then 2 weeks later, I received the verdict that surely they were willing to accept the fact that I personally was not a homophobe, but they had checked the General Conference, the highest organization of our church. They had looked at the various websites, and they could not do otherwise but conclude that we are homophobic. And it really hurt the reputation of the Seventh-day Adventist Church here in the Netherlands greatly. Although I fear it is still partly true. The doctrinal polarization that we see in our church, the constant fighting, the unwillingness to accept that there can be different positions with regard to various doctrines, it really hurts us when it comes to our reputation. The intolerance that we see in the church, and pushing this concept of the shaking is really part of this intolerance. The idea that there is a shaking where people who do not fully subscribe to the truth, as some of our leaders understand it, that these people will be shaken out, and that is necessary for the church to be able to continue to become perfect and to be saved. The reputation of our church is severely in problems because of our anti-science attitude. And when I say our, that is of course too general, but the widespread anti-science attitude and the impossibility to really talk together about evolution and origins. When you look at the fundamental beliefs number 6 on creation, the fact that that is put the way it is put, it has certainly damaged the reputation of the Seventh-day Adventist Church. And then from time to time, we may not have had the scandals that some other churches have had, but we have had our share, and they certainly have not helped the reputation of the Adventist Church. So there are, I think, a number of things that are a serious problem when it comes to the reputation of Adventism. We do everything we can, it seems, to work on our reputation. We have communication departments that are busy with public relations and, when necessary, with crisis management. We have the Public Affairs and Religious Liberty Department, and they try to build bridges, but often really the activities of the Parole Department are not matched by statements that are put out by the General Conference. Yes, ADRA is doing a great job in helping to promote Adventism, to restore some of and strengthen our reputation, as do hospitals and clinics, in particular in developing countries. And we have publications and TV spots, but how successful have we been? A reality is that in most countries, the majority of the people haven't even heard of Seventh-day Adventists. And the reality is also that in many countries, we are more known for what we do not believe, more known for what we do not do than for what we do. So what do people actually know about us, and what can we do to give them a good and positive view of what at least some Adventists want to proclaim? The church has a certain reputation. Church leaders, and that is true at all different levels of the church, also have a certain reputation. You know, is a leader political, spiritual? That is when we see certain leaders in the spiritual world, also in our own church. What is their reputation? It may not be totally true, but fact is that that is how we see church leaders, and church leaders have to take that into consideration. Are they conservative? Are they progressive? Are they mainline? Sometimes this characterization is not totally fair, but still that is something that is real. That is the reputation that we have. And some are happy to be called progressive, and some find that it hinders them if they are labeled as either conservative or progressive. Are they ecumenical? Now, to me, that is a good word, but for many in the church, that is almost like cursing. You cannot be ecumenical as a leader. More everyday applications. A leader often has the reputation of being hardworking, being relaxed, being lazy even. And it's hard to change the reputation once you've got that reputation. Once you've got the reputation that you're hardworking, you really can take a day off from time to time. Once you have the reputation that you are rather relaxed as with regard to your work, then in a nominating committee, that may surface. And some people may just tell the people that, well, yeah, he is okay, but. And then there is that sketch of a person's reputation. Is a person trustworthy? And as I mentioned, when we have elections, then in nominating committees, etc., there's lots of politics, there's lots of gossip, and the reputation, bad or good, of leaders, of people who are candidates for certain posts, that really plays a role. Reputation of church leaders. There's an important text, I think, that speaks about reputation, and in particular about the reputation of God, because that is in the end the most important aspect. Paul says in Romans, "May the God who gives endurance and encouragement give you the same attitude of mind towards each other that Christ Jesus had, so that with one mind and one voice you may glorify the God and Father of our Lord Jesus Christ." Glorify, give honor, honor the reputation of God the Father and of our Lord Jesus Christ. Greek word doxa, often translated with glory, but with that connotation of reputation. When we look at God's reputation, we must unfortunately confess that God has suffered. His name has suffered because of the deeds, the words of the Christians through the ages. His name has suffered greatly because, for instance, the Crusades, because of what happened, the things in the medieval papacy of the Borgias, the Inquisition, the wars of religion, and also the predestination doctrine. That has been a terrible thing that has really damaged the reputation of a God who is supposed to be a God of love. But it's very difficult to connect love and the predestination doctrine. The doctrine of hell and how hell has been portrayed, it has damaged God's reputation. And certainly also the behavior of cult leaders and cults over time. They have done a lot of damage to God's reputation and have caused many people to be disappointed, frustrated, and turned their backs on God. And I believe that we must add this last line. The evangelicals in the United States of America have done much to damage God's reputation. Now, I'm aware of the fact that I should not be too general there, but So maybe allow me to let that line stand and add maybe a portion of evangelicals in the USA. But some things that have happened, in particular in the last few years, have greatly damaged, I believe, that's my personal opinion, God's reputation. Now, and I'm coming towards the end of my talk. How do we protect God's reputation? The basis must be the biblical doctrine of God. God as a God of love, God as a God of compassion. If we do not succeed in portraying God, representing God as a God of love and compassion, we have failed. Demonstrating Christian values in our personal life that is reflecting the love of God and also recognizing justice. How do we protect God's reputation? I believe by building a totally inclusive church. And we all know what the ramifications are when we say that we want an inclusive church. And we protect God's reputation if we work for peace in all possible ways. Is that an individual responsibility to protect God's reputation, or is it a corporate responsibility? I think the answer is clear. It is both an individual responsibility and a corporate responsibility. As Christians, we must somehow help protect the reputation of God by representing him in the right way. The Apostle Paul said, "You yourselves are our letter, written on our hearts, known and read by everyone. You show that you are a letter from Christ, the result of our ministry, written not with ink, but with the Spirit of the living God, not in tablets of stone, but on tablets of the human hearts." We are an open letter representing God. His reputation in the world depends to a large extent on how we represent him, how well we are a letter written with the Spirit of the living God. And in the same letter, 2 Corinthians, we are Christ's ambassadors, and we ought to represent him in a way that is worthy of him. Our primary concern, then, I think, is not necessarily our own reputation, although we may want to care for our own reputation. It's not even primarily the church's reputation, even though that is very important, that we as members individually and corporatively do everything we can to, where necessary, restore, or where we can improve the reputation, the good name of the church in this world. But that, as his representatives, that is the most important thing. Show what it means to be followers of Christ, and that we represent the values that belong to the kingdom of God. And so that we build together, restore, repair, whatever, God's reputation in our world. Thank you very much for listening. I suppose that most of you have been listening. I, of course, have been looking at my screen, so I couldn't see any of you, but I've now turned away my screen and see that you're all still there.
Well, not only are we all still here, I think we've been captivated. You have such a unique capability to be able to take a topic and lay it out in such a logical and sensible way that expands on the clarity. So thank you for that, Dr. Bruinsma. I appreciate it. I'm glad to see, and Lauren is showing hearts. He agrees totally. So we're beginning. We have some folks who are ready to start and share their thoughts. Rebecca, you were early first in line, so welcome to you. And let me hold on. Let
Yes,
me let me ask you to unmute.
let me just say, Linda, that my name is Reinder.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
All right, very well. I'm happy to address you in that regard. Oh, I guess Rebecca has taken her name off. So, Lauren, you know how to unmute yourself, so start us off.
Something occurred to me as you were speaking. And Reinder, I'm sure you have encountered this somewhere along the way. When I wrote that piece about Adventists being anti-Catholic, and to me, for anybody to come out and say that they're anti-Catholic is absolutely cultic. It's like being anti-Semitic. Just to say, because if you belong to that group, you are bad. But it was very interesting that it was taken over to another website. It was copied over to another website. And one of the interesting comments that I kept saying is, I kept seeing is something along these lines. It's absolutely true that we should be opposed to Catholics, but I am so upset that you said it out loud. We should we should hold to that belief, but you shouldn't have said it. What if somebody else from outside the denomination reads this and they see that we're anti-Catholic? And I'm thinking, but we are. In fact, there are a certain number of Adventists that are furious if you don't say it out loud. I remember when I was a teenager, they kept telling us when we would complain about how different things had to be for us in the academy, they say, you're supposed to be a peculiar people. Well, there was nothing that a teenager wanted less than to be peculiar. And so I guess what I'm saying, Reinder, is that we seem kind of pulled betwixt and between. On the one hand, we want to have a great reputation. We want to say, oh, everybody loves Seventh-day Adventists. On the other hand, we can't let go of some of these ridiculous things that make us peculiar. And some of them make no sense whatsoever. We don't have to go around saying that the Pope is the beast of Revelation. We don't have to keep damning another church because and calling them our enemies. And of the most absurd thing of all is to go around saying they're preparing to persecute us. Oh, what a stupid thing to say.
Yeah.
Do we want to be peculiar or do we want to be accepted? And I'm not sure that Adventists know which one they actually want to be.
Well, they want to be both, and that is not possible. It's a choice you have to make. But yeah, I don't know whether you have noticed it, but just lately, the last couple of days, there are again from our president at the GC daily quotations on Facebook from the Great Controversy. And these are statements that deal with the beast, and et cetera. So I wonder whether there is some connection between his emphasis on the fact that we have to state it like it says in the book Great Controversy, and the fact that you have been speaking and writing about it. And I also wonder whether my forthcoming book on Adventists and Catholics has something to do with it. I expect that I might get some flack for kind of echoing the same sentiments as you do.
It is a very interesting thing because I think Elder Wilson wants to be. He loves being held up by he goes to Africa and they send a limousine for him and roll out the red carpet. And he goes to India and they put him in silver and gold chariots. And I think he really likes that. But at the same time, he says things that hurt us so much and doesn't seem to care on that. You're right. It's one or the other. Thank you. This was excellent. Thanks a lot.
But
Yeah,
this
thank
Catholicism really hurts our reputation.
Oh, I believe you're absolutely right.
Well, and Lauren, I'm not sure what peculiar meant in 1860, but today, don't we just think it means weird?
Yeah.
Well, we are weird in many ways.
All right, let me come to Dr. Johnson. Bob, how are you today? Oh, I'm just falling down on my job again. Let me, here we go.
There we are. Okay. I think it was about 20 years or so ago, maybe a little more, that we had this big event down in Waco, Texas. See, are we okay here? Am I being heard?
Yes, we hear you just
Okay.
fine.
Mark Finley and other of our leaders went on all the talk shows and news broadcasts to be sure that we distanced ourselves from the Davidian Seventh-day Adventists and that we were not the same group. Concern for reputation will ultimately require a hardening orthodoxy and a stricter discipline. I'd like to know what you think of that. Because we will be embarrassed by some people that we want to say are not part of us. That's one question that I have. The second thing is, ultimately, the biggest issue for God's reputation is theodicy. David Hume's observation that either God is good but weak, or he may be in other words, if he could prevent evil but doesn't, he's either weak or he's not good. And in my observation, in my pastoral activities and other activities in the church, I find this is the hardest thing to deal with. When good people suffer, that's the hardest thing. We have to figure out how to do this theodicy thing.
Yeah.
Those are my two observations.
Well, it's difficult to give a definitive answer to both of them. The first question, I think that when you have an organization with 22 million members or whatever number it is, you're bound to have different strands, different streams, different modalities. And that is true for any religious movement. And I believe that we should not be too nervous about that. Anybody who knows anything about religion will realize that that is inevitably going to be the case. You would hope that while there is this diversity, there is a kind of center that will be able to give comments where needed, corrections where needed. It seems to me that at the moment, the problem is not so much that we have these different modalities, although I wished there were fewer and there were fewer extremes and there wouldn't be those Conrads and etc. But at the same time, the problem is now that we miss that center that is somewhere in the middle and that is giving a balanced view of where we Adventists are and where we want to be. That our reputation is going to be damaged from time to time by some offshoots, etc., that is probably a risk that we cannot avoid. But as long as there comes from the middle of the church a voice that is respected and that is credible, and at the moment that is sadly missing, I think. Now, when it comes to the second problem, yes, that is, and I recognize a weakness in my presentation this afternoon, this evening, that I have not spoken very much. I've not said very much about theology, but sure, beyond the things that I have mentioned, that people notice about the church, there remains the fundamental issue of theodicy. And we realize that, and it's not an issue that we can solve. It is ultimately a matter of believing that whatever we see, God is there, God is a God of love, God is in control, and we'll eventually find out how things are and why he decided what he did decide. But in our personal lives and in theology, that is a key question that we deal with. Of course, the openness of God kind of theology tries to deal with it in one way. Others try to deal with it in a different way. But you're right that this theological issue hangs in the background, and there is no, this side, I believe, of the second coming, no fully satisfactory solution. But while we have that theological problem, yes, there are all these other issues, and some of them I have noticed where we are looked upon because of some of the things that we do or don't do, and some of the hang-ups that we have had even from our pioneer days, and that we do not cannot get rid of. So I don't know, Bob, whether this is somewhat satisfactory, but yeah.
Others will ask easier questions. That's all right.
Yeah, that's usually the case.
Thank you, Bob. George, it's nice to see you today.
Same here, Linda. It's so nice to see you, Reinder, again. Thank you for another great presentation. Couple of points. One is I'm very glad that you are still Reinder, not to change your name, as you confirmed at the beginning. I'm still George.
Okay.
One observation from your presentation that I never had thought about is that Adventists keep talking about Catholics persecuting them. And I tell you, one reputation that the Catholics acquired in my mind now is that they are very tolerant, because they have been persecuted by the Adventist Church for almost 200 years, and they never took any action about it.
Mm-hmm.
It's literally a persecution, distributing literature with accusations that are unfounded, and it's crazy. They know about it, and they did nothing so far. But the more complex comment I have, and a question regarding to that, is that what do you think about the reputation that the church created in our minds when it was acting dishonestly and duping us? I was deeply rooted in Adventism. I got 16 years of education in the same school, including their undergraduate degree in theology. And when I was 30 years old in 1980, I finally read something from Desmond Ford. That was the Glacier View document. And I was devastated because I learned that the church was dishonestly teaching things. I trusted the church, and I realized I had been duped for all this, not just me, everyone. And since the things got worse, so the reputation of the church in our hearts, in all those who are actually, I would say, in the periphery of the church or outside the church's reputation is so damaged and really bad based on facts. And I don't see the church interested in changing its reputation, in salvage anything. It's just getting worse by the day, with more books distributed and all that thing that we know is happening. And there's no effort, nor no move from the church to restitute its reputation to a level that would be acceptable for a Christian group. So, in your opinion, do you think that the church will ever do something to reconquer its good reputation, or it is what it is? Thank you.
I am an optimist. I have always been that. I hope to stay that. That also helps to keep me in the church. But let me first go to your first question about this element of persecution. Yes, it is true that Roman Catholicism has, in certain periods of time, been an agent of persecution. And when we think about the Inquisition, for instance, but even then we have sometimes exaggerated what has really happened. New studies about the Inquisition, which I have read, indicate that probably the number of victims was maybe around 50,000 to 100,000. Whereas in certainly earlier Adventist publications, it was always put at between 50 and 100 million. And that certainly cannot be substantiated, it seems, from the historical records. But they have persecuted. And in some areas in the world, even until relatively recently. On the other hand, we must not forget, and we sometimes do, that Protestants have also persecuted Catholics. And I belong to a little reading club, a couple of retired pastors, and we have recently read a book by a Japanese author, and I'll just ask my wife what the name is of the author, which I tend to forget. Anyway, this author writes about the persecution of Catholics in Japan. And when I read that book recently, Mr. Endo, Shusaku Endo, the book is called Silence. It was about the persecution of Jesuit priests in Japan. It was a most, it was a very rewarding read in the sense that it was beautifully written, but very, very sad and very, very telling that also these people were really willing to give everything for their faith and suffer for it. So there is often this lack of looking also at other agencies also in the Protestant world, and of course in the non-Christian world. Persecution has been there and continues to be there, apparently. But to think that the Roman Catholic Church will become a persecuting power, that is beyond anything that is really credible, considering what the church is today. Now, of course, people will say, yeah, they are okay today, and they will quote from the great controversy and say that the church is now showing, and I'm quoting my own, putting it in my own words, is now showing a kind face to the world. But if they have a chance, they'll just get after us. And well, if the Catholic Church has to do that, for instance, in the Netherlands, we have about 2% of all Catholics still attending church. And whether they will get excited enough to go after the Seventh-day Adventists in this country and do something to them, I very much doubt that. So let's be realistic and stop with this notion of this persecution in the way we have at least traditionally portrayed that. The other thing that you mentioned, and that is the element of dishonesty. Now, before I comment, I do want to say that it's not all bad in the Seventh-day Adventist Church, and there are many good people. And I enjoyed preaching this morning. For me, it is this morning in a church to maybe about 150 people, and it was a very nice atmosphere. So I felt very much I felt very positive about that experience. And it's not all bad, and there are many honest and lovable people. But there are areas, yes, where the church has been dishonest, and where sometimes things are told that are not true. And we have, and that has to do with our reputation. You mentioned the name of Desmond Ford. Now, the fact is that because of the Glacier View and everything that came with it and followed, the church lost a huge number of pastors in some areas of the world. And the reality is that many of us, many pastors, many church leaders, I include myself, actually have long believed most of the things that Desmond Ford has been writing and talking about. And if you talk to some of the current leaders, and one-to-one, they will tell you, yes, maybe Desmond Ford was right. And I think there is really a tendency at the moment to be much less sure about the investigative judgment, for instance, than there was even a few decades ago. And that has certainly to do with the ministry of Desmond Ford. And yes, so it hurts the reputation of the church when people hear how he was dealt with. And that is also true for some other instances where politics gained the upper hand over honesty and fairness. And an area where the church really has to come clean, I believe, is in some of the issues surrounding Ellen White. There are, without saying that, for instance, Steve Daly is right in everything that he has written, there are issues that we can no longer hide, and we must come clear about. And if we don't do that, it hurts the reputation of the church outside and also within the church. If the church is not willing to recognize that some of these things are now so well known that the church can no longer remain silent. And not only for political reasons, but simply because it's the right thing to do. So yeah, dishonesty. And that is what I said in the beginning also. Many people are frustrated, leave the church because they think hypocrisy, dishonesty. And we need to do something about that. And I hope we will do something about it sooner rather than later.
Well, and thank you, George, for your question. And actually, I want to, Reinder, I'd like to add a little bit to George's question before I come to Ian. I find myself wondering if the whole idea of reputation is totally outward facing. Is reputation only a one-way street, or is it possible that the reputation of our church actually affects inwardly to those who are here and are still in the church? We know from General Conference statisticians that over the last, I don't know how many years, that we traditionally lose 40% of our members, of our baptized members. And so is that attributable to reputation as it's perceived by those once they join? I mean, is there any calculus here for the idea of reputation affecting those who are part of the member group and causing them to reconsider their willingness to affiliate?
No. I think, yeah, you're right. I could have emphasized that a little more, that it's not just an outward thing, but it's for many inside the church and of various generations. The church has to be credible. It does not have to be perfect, but it must be credible.
Mm-hmm.
And it must at least be seen as trying to be honest. The very least we can expect. But the fact that you mentioned the 40% that leave, now that is, without knowing all the details and being an expert on this, I think the reasons differ from place to place. When I see what happened recently in Papua New Guinea, where a couple of 100,000 people were added, and I was in correspondence with somebody who is closer to the fact there, and I said, "What do you think happened?" And they said, "Well, we have a factory of backsliders there." That's how he mentioned it. It is just something that we recycle people. They come and go, and that is something I find very difficult to understand. That even the leaders from the General Conference get involved with that, support it with all they do, are out there baptizing people. Now, if you and I want to be members of the church, we must subscribe to all 28 fundamental beliefs, and we are told that if we don't, then we better go. And now these people can become members of the church. What do they know about what Adventism is like? And they have no connection with the church. Many of them, they have no buildings where they can come and worship. They have no pastors to give them the necessary nurture. And so that we lose lots of people there, that is understandable. But in, say, the Western world, in the United States, in Europe, etc., Australia, there are, I think, some of these factors are at work, that maybe we have baptized some people too quickly without them understanding completely what happened. But also people...
Gosh, Reinder, you make it almost sound like buying a timeshare accidentally.
Is that so? Okay. Well, what I was going to say, of course, I think many people are actually, in our part of the world, do not find that what they learned during the evangelistic campaigns actually matches what they find in the church. Mm-hmm. And then there are large numbers, certainly of the younger generation, but also amongst us, that we have some course, fundamental questions. We have some doubts, and sometimes we are not allowed to express them, to talk about them, and we feel that we should go somewhere else with our questions. That is true for quite a few people. And there are numerous reasons why people feel that maybe it is no longer the spiritual home, or it is not the spiritual home they were looking for. But that we lose many people, that is true. And that should worry us, but it does not seem to worry some of our leaders, because they feel it is a confirmation of the fact that we're going to have this shaking. It's inevitable. In fact, it's a sign of the soon coming of Christ.
Yeah, I appreciate your response to that. I think because of my children and my grandchildren, it's the internal flow of reputation, if we want to call it that today, that concerns me the most. But thank you for addressing it.
If I may just say, if we should ask all the people on this in this group who have similar experiences with their children and grandchildren, it would be a major percentage of
Sure.
who are with, and that should, worry us. Well, more than that, but we understand. At the same time, I do understand why my children are perhaps not as enthusiastic about the church as I try to be.
I appreciate that. Thank you so much. And Ian, thank you for your patience. What are your thoughts today?
So first of all, I want to thank Reinder for mentioning the reputation of God. I think that far outweighs any other reputations that we need to concern ourselves with. Carsten also emboldens me to what I'm going to say by some of the articles he's written. Thank you for that. I'm talking about the picture of God that is gleaned from the Old Testament, who is a distant deity who commands genocide and wars of extermination, and we've never dealt with this. And it's tragic, because if I listen to Richard Dawkins, Sam Harris, and others who sort of capture the age that secular people are confronted with, it is precisely about the nature of God. And Jesus came to change all that. And we have never majored on Jesus. And this is why we have so many problems. And it's like we put Band-Aids on them and hire better PR agencies instead of dealing with the elephant that's really in the room. Is God like Jesus?
Mm-hmm. Oh, okay. Well, okay. Doesn't this boil down, Jan, to the question of fundamentalism? Because reading the Old Testament as more or less a prescription for what our ethics should be even today, that gets us into trouble. The Old Testament is part of the scriptures. There is much that we can learn from it, but we should not read it in a fundamentalist way, as if that is the last word also for us Christians, New Testament Christians, when it comes to ethics and some theological issues. I agree with you totally that the New Testament, the Sermon on the Mount, those are the marching orders for us as Christians. it is something that will be very hard to really preach persuasively within our church, because we are to such an extent linked to the Old Testament that Jesus comes second place, it seems. And it is worrisome that when there are initiatives in the church that want to put Jesus second in the first place, give him priority, then there is anxiety at the top that, well, we are not pushing the doctrines so much, that it's too superficial. Somehow, just talking about Jesus is considered to be superficial. And unless we can change that, there is going to be that problem that you address.
Pastor Seeley, I'm asking you to unmute. I spent many happy summers at Lone Star MV Camp in Athens, Texas, near Corsicana. Is it possible it still exists?
Oh man, it does exist, and it's getting better and better and better.
I have to tell you one little thing. I was 11 years old the first time I went there, and a relatively new Adventist. And I did not know how to swim. And if you didn't know how to swim, then you couldn't take anything like boating or canoeing. They have a wonderful lake, for those of you that are unfamiliar with it. And so for those of us kids who didn't know how to swim, and we were taking swimming there, for the other class, it was too dangerous to swim, but they gave us giant machetes and had us chop a trail around the lake.
Wow.
So
you can't swim, but have a
but you
machete.
could, big machete, yeah, not to mention the mosquitoes. Oh, my word in heaven. But I have such precious fond memories of my time there. It was really, really wonderful. But
Awesome.
Welcome to you today. We're glad you're here. How did you find Reinder's talk, and what are your thoughts today?
I really appreciated all the points, the conversation, the topic. I just wanted to throw this out here as we were, processing and digesting this. And I don't know if it's overly simplistic, but I'll throw it out for consideration anyway. I can't help but to wonder if maybe the reason why we find ourselves in the weeds on this is because, in Jude 1:3, the admonition is to fight for the faith. And I can't help but wonder if maybe we've interpreted the faith as the church or the organization, that maybe we've conflated the two, right? Because if you look at Christ and his ministry, I don't recall a lot of defense of character or defense of his reputation, right? Jesus just got to work seeking to do the mission that was entrusted to him by his Father, right? And then even when he was doing great deeds, even when he had a mass of individuals following him, you still had those who were trying to tear him down. You had the Pharisees, the religious leaders who were saying, "We told you he has a devil," right? So, I don't know that you can go through life and avoid staining on your reputation, but I can't help but to wonder if by focusing on fighting for the church or trying to uphold the organization, that we are missing what we've been commanded to do, which is fighting for the faith, which I don't believe is the same thing. So would love to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think I would go a long way with you and say that the faith and the institution of the church is not the very same. The institution of the church can be a help for people to experience their faith together. And I believe that faith, there was a French philosopher, theologian, Paul Ricoeur, who said that if you want to have faith and strengthen your faith, it's the same as learning a language. When you want to learn French, you need to go to France or to some other French-speaking area and be among French-speaking people. And I know from experience that that is true. And he says that if you want to know the language of faith, go to the place where the language of faith is spoken. And I find that an interesting observation about the role of the church. But it can become, and we see that not only in our denomination, but in other denominations as well, it can become a matter of we want our church to grow, we want the institution to grow, we want the figures, the numbers, etc. And if the church is attacked, we want the church to survive. So the church, rather than the individuals in the church, becomes the focus of our concern. I think that what you said about the New Testament not being, not having that focus, maybe wouldn't you agree that when you look at the letters in the New Testament, there is some concern for the reputation of some of the local churches? When, for instance, 1 Corinthians, it is clearly that Paul sees that some things are terribly wrong there, and that the reputation of that church has really suffered, and he wants to correct that. So maybe that is also true.
Well, I didn't know if there was a follow-up, Pastor. I'm sorry, you're muted, and I think lost the ability to get you back. Put your hand up though if you want to follow up. Put your hand up and we'll get you back up. Well, Karsten, I'm asking you to unmute. You've created a lot of problems in the chat with your provocative comments. What do you have to say to us out loud?
I better shut up.
Well, it's one of the disadvantages when you are the speaker that you cannot follow the chat. So I have no idea you have been.
Reinder, I greatly appreciate your comments. The thing that makes me sad is that you're preaching to the choir.
Yeah.
And I first have a comment and then a follow-up question. When I look at your slide deck here, these are the points, many of them, that make Adventism unique. So you've just given Ted Wilson the fodder for his Autumn Council presentation again and again, where he will say, these are the unique things about Adventism. This is where we stand firm though the heavens fall. That's just a slightly sarcastic observation, but I'm afraid there's a little bit of truth in it. And you can also see that in the chat that Clifford Goldstein has chimed in and said that Reinder is a good friend of mine, and I disagree with virtually everything that he says today. But the question that I have is something that we haven't discussed that much. It's certainly fun for us all to sit and vent steam, and it's a healthy and a safe outlet for some of our frustrations. But when I look at our demographics, probably 10 to 15 years from now, about half of us are going to be 6 foot under. Mm-hmm. When I look at our church in Nærum, Denmark, where I live, the first thing we say about all of these issues is, thank God that the General Conference is on the other side of the Atlantic. And we then ignore all the stuff that, crudely said, can be called nonsense. But when I see the young people in our church now who are studying advanced degrees in medicine, science, technology, and so on, we have a core group of about 20 young people there who are very resource-strong people who are going into some of the top positions in terms of medicine, science, technology, engineering, and so on. They're very bright and intelligent, and yet many of them are not even aware of all of this, pardon the word, nonsense that we're discussing here today, because they would perceive it as irrelevant noise in their life. Mm-hmm. So with that as a preface, when I imagine when I am 6 feet under in 10 or 15 or 20 years, and a new generation is taking over, there, at least in our church, seems to be a huge gap demographically between 35 and 50, 60 years. And then there's a new wave coming in that's not aware of all the 1844 issues and Ellen White stuff and so on. What do you think the church will look like 15, 20 years from now when we've all said goodbye?
All right. Yes, Carson, we are preaching to the choir. At the same time, and I realized that, and I wished there were other opportunities to preach to people who are not part of this choir. At the same time, pastoral responsibility, I think, demands that when you go out preaching and you have many non-choir members, that you go easy and you go careful and you try to keep the people with you rather than raise all the questions at the same time. But also for the choir, it is important that the choir has its meetings. And for many who are part of this group, this has become their church. And they find comfort in the fact that they sense they're not the only ones with questions and with, yes, some doubts. So yes, we're preaching to the choir, but let's keep doing that. At the same time, find ways of preaching to others outside of the choir as well. Are we doing away with some of the things that are unique to Seventh-day Adventism? And yes, I think that my friend Cliff would say that that is indeed what we are doing and what I'm doing in particular. I am aware of the fact that to some extent that is true. On the other hand, I think that we face the challenge, and he should be part of that as well, to rephrase and work on some of these unique sense and make them relevant in a way that they are no longer to many people. But the problem is that sometimes when we use other words and when we use other examples, people feel that we are no longer talking about the same issue. But yes, that is the great challenge, I think, that we face, that is that we look at some of these things and say, well, maybe there are some things that are no longer part of the core message that we need to preach. Maybe, certainly, not only maybe, certainly, there are things that we should just rephrase in a different way and present in a different way in language that is understood. When you read some of the language of some of our leaders, and you have all the cliches put together, then I'm sure that many like me are after 3-4 lines are quitting and say, well, this is not the kind of thing that I can relate to. What is going to happen with our church in the future? None of us knows. I would hope that there is some kind of change that will enable the church, that will give the church greater freedom to think, to experiment, and to wrestle with the questions that people have. And whether that change will come, some people will say, no, things don't change. Well, when we look at our church, yes, many things have actually changed, even though far too slow, in my opinion. But change is possible. Whether that change will come, some will say that's very unlikely. I would say, I believe that if God has anything to do with this church, then he will help us to somehow come to kind of church that has a future. I don't know whether I'm formulating this clearly enough, but that is what I believe.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Cherry Ann, I'm glad to see you. What are your thoughts today?
Hi, Linda. It is so lovely to be here. And Reinder, thank you for your presentation and for actually, putting out and wrestling with this question of God's reputation. The thoughts that I'm having since I read the summary and listened to you this afternoon is about authenticity versus reputation. And because when I think about it, authenticity is who you actually are. It's the quality of being genuine, being true, while reputation has to do more with how you're perceived or how you present yourself, as opposed to the genuine person that you are. And I thought about that with regards to the comment in the article that spoke of persons leaving the church or persons saying they have no faith. And you asked a couple of questions after that I want to kind of make some comments, and then I'll ask a question with regards to could understanding how people see us explain why so many of our young people leave and why our evangelism seems ineffective. And for me, I recognize that if we presented the authentic church and the authentic people of the church, then I think that would actually make a very big difference, particularly with young persons. And I know it's difficult for a large organization to wrestle with some of these questions. It's kind of like trying to turn a cargo carrier. However, when you present yourself as one thing and persons see something else and they start asking questions and you try to convince them that, oh no, we don't really believe this about Ellen White. And you're like, no, but that's not how you present her. That's not how you treat with her when you preach and when you use her quotes. Or, there's one thing I know Lauren likes to joke about me posting pictures of myself and my fermented grape juice. But then that's just a part of the authentic part of me. It makes me no less a Sabbath keeper, no less an advocate for treating people well. So I want to put it to you, Reinder, that if as a church, we sought to be more authentic and stop trying to tell people that you're not really seeing what you're seeing, or we're not really saying what you think we're saying, doing the kind of cognitive dissonance that we saw in the presentation last week, that if we really sought to be genuine and wrestle with the difficult questions and the difficult pieces of our past, then we could have more credibility with how we represent God and how others would then perceive us. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I could give a very short answer to your question. I think you hit the nail on the head that authenticity is the key word. And, especially I think the younger generation has the the ability to see whether you are genuine or not. And if they sense that you are fake, then you've lost it. And I think that is unfortunately how many see many people in the church, also leaders in the church, as fake, as not authentic. And I personally, I think I can honestly say that I have always tried to be also in public what I am, and not to paint a picture of who I'm not. And that, I think, has been at least appreciated by some. So yes, to be what you are, and that also makes it possible to relate to other people who you see also as authentic. You have, even if you disagree, there is a basic chemistry where you can talk. But when you feel that it is play, it is something that is not genuine, there is some kind of intuition that tells you stay away from that person. So yeah, let's as individuals be authentic, and yes, let the church also just deal with certain issues in more transparently. Just tell it as it is, and not paint a picture that is really not recognizable as true. Yeah, I think that's
But yes, Sherry Ann, don't mute yourself, because I want to ask you a question about that. Would you suppose, Sherry Ann and Reinder, that the need for individual and personal authenticity is what causes some members of the Adventist Church either to leave or to choose no longer to actually identify themselves with that moniker, perhaps choosing to say, well, I'm a follower of Jesus, when asked about their religious affiliation? Is authenticity the driving force there, do you think?
For a lot of persons that I interacted with, yes, authenticity is a big part of it. The Gen Zers will talk about speaking their truth, but it really has to do with being able to question things and to be allowed the space to come to a different conclusion than the collective and still be accepted. And unfortunately, our church doesn't make a lot of room for that. And so you'll have persons who will tell me, one of them who is on today that I invited him to join, who'll tell me, oh, don't leave, because if everybody who sees the opportunity for the church to evolve, if all of us leave, then the church will never change. And I've said this here before, that I'm not sure if I have the patience to wait for the change that I'd like to see. So yeah, I do think that the need for authenticity, to be authentic, to be accepted as your authentic self, especially if you're not hurting yourself or others, then that is a driving force for a lot of persons to say, I can't do this anymore.
yes.
Well, I have often said, no one wants to be the one shred in the fabric of unity, because we fear that lack of acceptance by the group if, in fact, our authentic views, vary in some places.
But I think that there is actually often more space in the church than many claim there is. And when I speak for myself, I try to be who I am, but I found that has not always been totally easy, but at the same time, I have been able to function and still function within the Seventh-day Adventist community. And you must seek for the space. You must also claim the space, and then you must, of course, others allow the space as well. But yeah, I know there are places, there are local churches where it is virtually impossible to be authentic. And then you have a major dilemma where you go.
Mhm.
I want to belong to a community of believers. I know the Seventh-day Adventist Church is not perfect. I am not perfect, but other denominations, other groups are not perfect either. And there is enough in Adventism that continues to attract me. And I feel that there is still enough space for me also to minister within that community. So that is why I am still part of Seventh-day Adventism.
Thank you. Sherry Ann, any closing thought on that?
No, that's good. Thanks so much, Linda, for the opportunity to share.
Absolutely. Glad you were here. So, Pastor Seeley, did you want to circle back around on what you were talking about before, or if you have something new to add?
I feel like we're kind of a little bit off. I do resonate with what Sherry Ann said, very much so, in the sense that sometimes our focus can be less on authenticity and more on reputation. A scripture that came to mind and it's Reinder, right? Do I have that accurate? Reinder? Yes. Okay. Awesome. That came to mind is around the time Jesus started his ministry in Matthew, where he says, "Let your light so shine before men that they will see your good works and glorify your Father which is in heaven." I think one of the things that we perhaps need to shy away from is this idea that Adventism is a monolith, right? That it's uniform, right? I think one of the beauties of the way that the church is structured is that uh, the Adventism is it can be very contextual. And one of the things that come to my mind, I had the opportunity to be in India. I went on a mission trip to India. And I remember we gathered in a local home for worship. And this is around the time where, and it may still be the case in some places, the issue surrounding drums in the church was a big thing. And I remember we were sitting there in this living room and somebody brought out a little drum called a wham, they called it, and just started, we were singing and they were just beating this thing and it sounded so good, right? And I was like, man, in my mind, for me then and there, just kind of solved for me that worship may not look the same way the world over, but if we're worshiping the same God, right? If we're glorifying God, then I believe that God is pleased. And I think that there's this push towards making us all so uniform that we demonize things and people and approaches and perspectives that God himself doesn't demonize, right? But I feel like Adventism can be very contextual, and I believe that the way the policy in the church is set up is that if something is beneficial for a specific region or mission field that is not going against the teachings of the word, right? Or deviating too far from the Adventist stance that is permissible. And yet I've seen kind of this movement towards making us uniform, maybe in an effort to guard the church's reputation, right? But I think for me, the question that comes to mind is, who are we really trying to please when we do that, right? If that's our focus, who are we really trying to please? Are we trying to glorify our Father in heaven, or are we seeking the affirmation and the approval of men or one another, right? So I definitely resonated with what Sherry Ann said. Really appreciate the conversation. Thank you for sharing your perspectives. Really loving this. Thank you so much.
Well, I
We're glad you.
fully agree. Thank you.
Yes, and Pastor Seeley, we're glad you joined us. We hope you join us again. Clifford, I see you with your pup. You can't see my.
Yeah, she keeps me calm, so she'll help me keep calm here. Well, listen, again, I always have to give this caveat. I am speaking for me. I'm not speaking for the GC. I don't feel like getting the church sued again because I said something. This is for me. Nobody asked me to come. They'd probably rather I'm not on here. And as I said before, I'd appreciate not saying anything. Okay, this really is utterly, utterly fascinating to me because it's opening me up to seeing things in Adventism that it's just never been my experience. Look, I know there are problems, and I don't doubt every one of the problems to some degree or another that you're talking about, to a certain degree, are real. But I just made a quick list here. Okay, you guys talked about our reputation. I once heard a saying one time where someone said, you probably won't worry so much about what people think about you if you realized how little they think about you. And I just don't, I don't know how many people even think about us or know what our internal problems are. I'm just wondering why that was an issue. And I think it was somebody brought up, hey, Jesus just did what he believed he needed to do and didn't worry about what people thought. Can we do better? Of course, we can all do better. We as the church, I think I said once, we're here a lot longer than we were supposed to be. We've built these massive institutions. and we have to go through all the rigmarole to keep them. And this brings up issues and problems and so on. And as someone else said, the church is not a monolith. Everybody, Ted Wilson doesn't control everything that goes on in the church. In fact, most Adventists don't realize how little power the General Conference president has. And, he can't kick a single one of you out of your church. You could say what you want. He has no power. And the way the church is structured, it was structured that way. So, all right, again, so I guess the question about reputation, and I don't think, Reinder, you and I have dealt with this. I've said it before, I'll say it again as quick as I can. You parallel Daniel 2, Daniel 7, Daniel 8. In all three chapters, after Greece, one power arises and exists to the end of the world where it's supernaturally destroyed. Daniel 2, Daniel 7, Daniel 8. One power after Greece changes form and exists till the end of the world where it's supernaturally destroyed. It's solely, totally, only Rome. And again, the fact that right now Rome isn't a persecutor or things are, look, we all know how instantly, overnight, the world could change in a moment. See, I learned a long time ago about not doing headline theology. Oh, the Pope says this, and then somebody thinks, but it could work the other way as well. Things in the world certainly don't look like the way what we believe. Therefore, it's not going to happen. So all I could do is go by scripture, and I keep it as simple as I can. Daniel 2, Daniel 7, Daniel 8. One power after Greece exists to the end of the world. That power reappears in the book of Revelation in a persecuting role. Now, the Ford thing, I read something the other day that I wish I had read years ago. I read the points that they went after Desmond Ford on at Glacier View. And I was just not one word about Ford's gospel. Okay. See, one of the reasons it took me 10 years when I joined the church, right when the Ford thing started, took me 10 years, I think, to work through this, including 6 of them at the GC, because they never criticized Ford on the gospel. That was never the issue. What he said, I'm sorry. And this is what kind of ticked me off. Desmond Ford raised valid questions about the sanctuary, but our scholars did excellent work. Volume 1, Volume 2, they answered point by point by point. Hassel put Ford's baloney through his Teutonic meat grinder. And yet I even had a good friend at Glacier View. I don't want to mention the name. He's deceased now, certainly not a conservative. And he told me how at Glacier View, Ford would give arguments like, well, Christ's blood would have dried up by 1844. It can't be. In other words, he said he didn't budge on one thing. So again, I wasn't raised with the hangups on the gospel. It took me years before I understood what these hangups were. And I wish I would have known that decades ago, because I think I could have been a little more pastoral in trying to help some of these people. But in terms of Ford, and the other thing too, and then I'll stop because I could just keep going. And my wife's going to come back with the grandkid. I don't know if I said this before. I'm an Adventist. The church has been good to me, very good to me, better than I deserve. But I like to use Plato's cave metaphor. and I imagine most of you here would know what I'm talking about. I know of no other organized body in the world that preaches biblical truth to the degree that Seventh-day Adventism does. I might have said this like, if you get rid of the seventh-day Sabbath, you've wiped out 99.5% of your options. You give up the state of the dead, you've wiped out 99.5% of the 0.5% less. See, I tell the Adventists, you're stuck with me. I have to be here from the experiences I've had and the things I believe. I have to be here. I'm aware of the problems, but I don't know where else are you gonna go? And I just anyway.
Clifford, does this mean that you're not going to retire from your position with the Quarterly?
Well, not voluntarily. Put it this way, I got to the GC when I was 28 years old, and I'd see all these old codgers in their 60s. In the late 60s, and says that, why don't these old goats leave? Well, now I'm one of the old goats. I don't want to go. So I have to be reappointed next year. So please don't say anything about me being on here. But if they let me back in, I'll keep going. I seriously doubt that by the time I'm 75, they'll let me stay back in. I mean, they might throw me out. I mean, they tell me I could stay, but until it's voted. But I've said this before. I was a seeker for truth. I didn't even know God existed. And I said, God, if there is a truth out there, God, if you're there, reveal yourself to me. 40 some years ago, I got led right to the Adventists. And I'm at the point in my life now, and then I promise I'll stop for whatever it's worth. I am so logically, rationally, and intellectually convinced of this message that it's almost like I don't even need faith. Now, of course, you need faith. I need faith to know that I'm the same person I was yesterday. Of course, you need faith with everything. But I'm so at that it's just not an option for me. And so I got some problems. Well, Reinder, look, you and we've been going back and forth for decades now. And whatever my differences with you, Reinder, I do like you as a human being. I believe you are an honest soul. I don't understand your logic and reason. Now, somebody put up here, logic destroys faith. Yeah, maybe. But logic is only as good as your premises. Okay, logic is always, I said, I have very logical, well, you know what I said once? I have very logical, rational reasons for believing in things that transcend where logic and ration and reason can take you. But anyway, so me coming from this perspective, and Lauren has always said to me, Cliff, you've been 40 years at the GC. Okay, you're gonna have a certain, you're going to see things a certain way. And in fact, I taught Sabbath school this morning to my church, to my group. And I said, you are absolutely, utterly duped and deceived if you don't believe that your culture, your environment, the way you were raised, your genes, everything impacts your faith. Okay, we can't escape it. We're hopelessly subjective beings. Everything is impacted by that. But anyway, all right, look, let me stop because I'll just
Clifford,
keep going.
Clifford, we're glad that you feel comfortable to join us. I can assure you.
I love it coming on here. Sometimes my blood pressure rises a little bit, but that's all right.
Please stay on your meds. We don't want you to have
Well, I know.
But you'll
my
find
dog lowers my blood pressure.
This is quite an egalitarian and non-judgmental group, and we are.
Yeah, I know that, and I appreciate that.
Other viewpoints. So
even George, I appreciate my good buddy George.
Well, there you go. So Doug, I see. Oh, Doug, I was so entranced, I forgot to
Yes,
ask Doug to unmute.
maybe we should give Reinder a chance to respond.
Yes, I'm going to do that. I'm sorry. Reinder, please. Of course, I gave you a gift by intercepting, but please do respond, Reinder. Thanks, Lauren.
The great advantage of having Cliff come on that I can take a rest and at least sit back for about 15 minutes. And it's good to hear, Cliff, that you still think that I'm a reasonable and likable human being. And it's about time that we meet somewhere and have a good meal together. But you are still among the powerful, and I'm just a retired pastor here in the Netherlands. But I think you underestimate the number of people that do not believe that it's all as simple as you say, 3 chapters in Daniel being parallel, and that solves the problem. Your view on Catholicism, and I know what your view is, and you know what my view is, I think that I have reality on my side, and I don't think that when you say the Bible says, it's actually my interpretation of the Bible is, and that's a different thing. When you say that, I noted that you say when you say that the General Conference president has no power, that is certainly not true. We have a model of church governance in our church where the top of the pyramid has a lot of power. It is fashioned after the American political system, where the president surrounds himself with people of like mind and has a lot of initiative and has a lot of power. It is true, fortunately, that he cannot make sure that people are removed from their membership. That's a good thing, because otherwise that would happen here and there, I'm sure. So, but to say that he has no power, whatever you think of that, whether you like him or don't like him, or whether you agree with him or not, he does have a lot of power, and he uses that power. And we see that. And if you cannot see that, maybe it's because you're too close to it. But the rest of the world certainly does see that. And you spoke about Desmond Ford. Well, if there was no issue with the gospel, there were only other issues, then it's really a shame that he was put aside. If there were no issues if they agreed with him on the basics of the gospel, why was he dismissed? Why did he lose his credentials? Well, we don't have time to, I suppose, to go into all these questions, but to state these things so forcefully, Cliff, I really must take issue with many of these things.
Thank you, Reinder. Lauren, I know before I come to Doug, this is a time in our session where you often like to do a commercial
Yes,
about the coming weeks.
And I'm delighted to do that. We have next week a really good teacher. He has taught a lot at the Faith and Reason class out at Sligo Church, but we're inviting him this time. His name is Rolf Poehler, and Dr. Poehler is from Friedenau, and he and I chatted a little bit, and I think I've got a pretty good sense of his topic. He's going to be talking about Adventist misconceptions about doctrinal change. There is a bit of a myth that Seventh-day Adventists have the very same beliefs that they had at the beginning, that we are still doing. We're holding to what they call historic Adventism. And Dr. Poehler says, no, there's probably, it's probably a lot more nuanced than that. We have adopted new things and let things go over the course of time. So he's going to be talking about that. That should be very good. The next week, we have one of my favorite teachers, Dr. Brian Ness from Pacific Union College. And he is going to be talking about genetics and our spiritual life, and how much of who we are spiritually comes from the equipment that was given us, the mental equipment, the faith that was given us in who we are. So that should be. I'm oversimplifying it because he's going to be much more careful than that. But that should be good. Cliff, I want to thank you for speaking up. I don't agree with you, but that's nothing new. But I will say this about your reelection. How long has Dwayne McKee been there? If Dwayne McKee can survive as long as he has, I think they're going to let you stay. So I think you're going to be okay. I mean, Dwayne McKee must be 75 at least, isn't he? Something like that. And so I think you're going to be safe if you want to stay for a while. However,
Well, yeah, whether they'll let me, again, I don't know if age could really be the problem, but and maybe too, there's the time when you gotta, hey, enough is enough already. And though I love to write, I love to edit, and I love to teach.
Yeah.
So the Sabbath School Quarterly, but the problem with my job is my mistakes go in 125 languages. And when the poo-poo hits the fan, and that kind of gets a little wearying after a while. And but I consider it a privilege. They throw me out next year. I'd like to think I'd handle it gracefully. I won't. I know I won't, but I'll probably get over it and find something else to do. But anyway, and again, well, Reinder, I would still, well, never mind. We can go back and forth on the Rome thing. We've been doing it for what, like 20 years now? We've been going back and forth. But Ford was booed and got the thing at Glacier. I mean, read the thing. I read this last week. It was his nonsense about the sanctuary. There was nothing about the gospel. Because the church, now, admittedly, a lot of Adventists don't have the gospel. Real quick, I gave worship at the GC about 25 years ago. And as a joke, I was going to start out as a joke. And I said, I've been in the church now 20 years, whatever. And I think I'm finally understanding what it means to be an Adventist. And I thought it was going to be funny. And I said, I'm starting to doubt my salvation. And it went over like a lead balloon. And I realized Adventists don't find that funny. And so I will concede, absolutely, there has been a problem and remains. Adventists not fully grasping the gospel. And if Ford would have stuck to that and not got onto his nonsense about the sanctuary, I don't think anybody would have bothered him. But anyway, all right, okay. I'm done. I got to stop.
What I would say in response, Cliff, is simply that for some of us, the Jesus event and the heart of the gospel is so big and so overwhelming that the rest of it, the parallel chapters in Daniel and Revelation, just seem like a distraction rather than the heart of what we really need. But anyway, we're going to go until we get through with these remaining hands, and then we'll see you next week with Rolf Poehler.
Let me just say that I would hope that Cliff would get re-elected, but only on the condition that he lets you, Lauren, write a couple of quarterlies.
I think that's unlikely, but I would love to write about
Would be my
a church that's open and kind and draws the circle large and brings in everybody from the edges and lets them, as Len Seeley said, be anything but a monolithic church. I'm just with Elder Seeley on that completely. That's what I want. I want a broad church, not a narrow church, not a church that's defined by Ted Wilson standing up and giving 16 very narrow points that we have to be in order to be a Seventh-day Adventist. Reinder, I can't be that. I've got to be what Jesus called me to be.
Well, thank you, Lauren, and we'll look forward to the next coming weeks. Doug, you've been patient. I'm glad that you've decided to raise your hand. What are your thoughts this afternoon?
Well, first of all, thanks for the presentation. It made my list longer than I really wanted, as I was thinking about the things that it triggered in my mind. But the first one was actually one that probably nobody here has ever thought about. Leave it to me to think that. When I transitioned from commercial aviation to banking, both, of course, have regulators. And many of the characteristics were similar in the regulators, but one was far different. You're probably wondering where this comes from. The regulator for banking includes the issue of oversight of the reputation of individual banking institutions, unlike commercial aviation. And so in my analogy, what I think of in this regard is the reputation of Christianity, as long as Adventism thinks it's a part of Christianity, which I suspect it does and will continue to, the reputation of Christianity is in some respect affected by the reputation of Seventh-day Adventism, whatever we think of ourselves as a portion of that. And so I see reputation as very important to the general reputation of Christianity, much like was pointed out in the presentation. And therefore, our reputation collectively as Adventists, I believe, is important because it reflects in that way on the collective Christianity. Having thought of that, I thought of a book. It's probably the only book title that I remember from this vintage, which I think is probably from the early 70s, by an author that I think most of us will know, George Vandeman. He wrote many things that I probably have long forgotten, but he wrote a book, the title of which was and is What I Like About. And then right on the cover, he listed the Lutherans, the Baptists, Methodists, Charismatics, Catholics, our Jewish friends, and the Adventists. I would love for somebody to replicate that now in more modern times, because I think he did a masterful job of recasting our otherwise negative relationship with Catholicism in a very positive way with all of these other faiths. And I think in modern times, it could have been expanded to include Islam and other religions as well. I think of another book by another author that I think zeroes in on the issue that came up with Cliff and others. It's written by Ty Gibson. It's a very small pamphlet. In fact, it's actually out there live on the internet, The Romanism Within. And I think Ty did a masterful job of illustrating how Romanism is something that resides in all of our hearts as a potential. Whatever it is we may think about the Catholics, in our official position, Romanism is a vulnerability we all have. It's a power thing. And I believe that's as live in Adventism as it ever has been. In Catholicism, it's just we haven't gotten that big yet, thank goodness. And so I see those as critical issues in what we've been talking about. Adventism, for whatever else it may have given me, gave me the idea that I should think for myself and not be mere reflectors of other men's thoughts, other people's thoughts. And so I appreciate that heritage. But I also realize that over the years that I've been an Adventist, that an illustration on the bottom of page 355 of the book, Seeking a Sanctuary, illustrates so well when I read it. It shows a revolving door. And the persons going in the first door are aspirers, those that come into the faith. Then somewhere further along are the sustainers, and then there are the transformers. And very often after that last is the people that exit Adventism, either intellectually exit or physically exit. And I appreciate that that perspective from those outside looking in was so clear to me at the time that I read that. Thanks for listening.
Thank you.
Reinder, do you want to comment on that?
No, I think that was more a statement than a question, and something that I really agreed with, and I think that was a valuable addition to what we have been talking about. Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you. Clarence, I've asked you to unmute. Welcome. I'm glad that you're here with us. If you'd like to unmute and share your thoughts with us. There you go.
I've been having some trouble lately with this this computer, but I'm glad to be here on this Sabbath afternoon. It's afternoon out here. I was just thinking somebody needs to tell Cliff that he's flatly wrong. It's as simple as that. He says he's been going back and forth for 20 years or so. Well, listen, brother, if for 20 years you haven't been able to convince people of the truth of what you're saying, then you should begin to reason with them and try to understand what they're saying. Otherwise, you're being simply unreasonable. It's as plain and simple as that, in my head at least. Thank you very much. Well, that leaves you speechless, doesn't it?
Well, I don't know if Reinder wants to respond to that. But you know, it's interesting. I have one question. I've kind of waited to see if there would be time. But Reinder, I wrote it down, but early in your presentation, you mentioned that last generation theology has hurt the reputation of the Adventist Church. And I wonder if you would elucidate a bit on how you see that. How do you, is that, once again, does it hurt us in terms of how our own members respond to that concept and the fact that it seems to be embraced by some of our leadership at higher levels? Or do you think it is reputationally damaging to us in terms of how those outside our denomination see us?
Well, most people outside of our denomination would probably not know of the concept. And actually, many of the people inside the church may not know the term last generation theology, although many do. But even those who do not know the term or the exact philosophy behind it have some aspects of it that has contaminated their, that's what I would like to call it, their Adventist experience. And one of the key things is that I think the people who promote it, they simply claim to know too much about how things work and what is going to happen in the future, etc., etc. And they have a very shallow understanding of sin. That is why they can believe that perfection is possible. And yes, if you have a certain concept of sin, maybe you can tick the things off and decide that now you're almost there, or you've finally gotten there. the theory would be much more convincing to me if I had actually met a person who has come to that point that he is or she is really perfect. It causes a lot of stress and tension also with people with that kind of attitude. And of course, it has certain ramification with regard to the end time scenario of our tradition. And I think that we should a little be, or maybe much less certain about how things are going to play out exactly. We know very little. Some statements are just, or some opinions are just based on a few statements of Ellen White rather than on some biblical statements. When I think, for instance, of this whole topic of the shaking, there is no biblical evidence that something like that will come about. There are a few Ellen White statements that can be interpreted maybe in that direction. So, well, a lot could be said about last generation theology, but I think it's really a danger to the spiritual health of individuals and of the church.
Thank you. You know, I too had to teach a class, a Sabbath school class, an adult class this morning on Zoom. And Reinder, I found what might be an interesting parallel to what you just said in my research, and I haven't had a chance to really authenticate this, but, you know, we always thought that the reason that the Jews kind of missed who Jesus was because their expectation was that they wanted to be freed from Roman rule. That was sort of the overriding issue. But in this research I did, it appears that among the rabbis, there were two views about what the Messiah would be like. There's the Daniel 7 view, where you have a conquering warrior who comes, and then there's the Zechariah view, which is one we're all familiar with, that the Messiah would come, your king will come, you know, riding on a lowly donkey, a humble man. And the commentator that I read said the way that the rabbis reconciled these two variant theories about what to expect from the Messiah had to do with this. They believed or promoted the belief that if the Jewish nation was worthy, well, let me say it the other way around. If the Jewish nation was unworthy, that the king, the Messiah, would come in a humble way. But if they were worthy, then the Messiah would come as this conquering hero. In other words, elevating their own status as a part of the equation. And because they believed they were worthy, they expected the conquering king as the Messiah, which it seems to me almost like a variation on the theme of last generation theology. The way they elevated their own view of themselves and how they thought that would have an influence on God's plan.
Yes, and there are some other issues with last generation theology. It makes also the time of the return of Christ dependent on our efforts. And that is something that I think is a heresy.
Exactly. And actually, as a part of today's lesson too, was the cursed fig tree, which really kind of plays into that. It wasn't so much the absence of fruit that caused Jesus in his only destructive miracle to cause the tree to wither. It wasn't so much the absence of fruit, it was the pretense of the leaves. There was the appearance of being fruitful when in fact it wasn't. Clifford, I'm going to unmute you, but we really are literally down to the last few moments. So if you have a brief remark to make, we'd be glad to hear it.
Yeah. Well, I just wondered, how much of this last generation stuff is really out there? I mean, all right, certain groups, but I don't see it in our publications. I don't hear our leaders preaching on it. I go to a fairly conservative church. I've never heard my pastor. In fact, I don't think I've ever, in all my years in Adventism, have ever really heard a sermon on it. So maybe, is it really that prevalent out there? I never hear it.
I can assure you it is, Cliff. And after writing a little book on it and the comments that I have received, etc., very convinced that it is a real issue on a global scale. And even the General Conference president has preached on it.
Well, there you have it.